What's going on, YouTube? It's Left Side Liam here, and today I want to just really go over some super interesting technology and reports that I've been reading and really just pass along what I've been seeing happening and really what I consider to potentially be a new dawn of DeFi. Now, this is a new dawn separate from the DeFi 2.0. I think this whole narrative could wrap into the DeFi 2.0 narrative. As far as liquidity and optimizing liquidity and efficiency. So we shall see how this goes. But just to hop in here before we start going to the different sources and whatnot. So there's a big problem with crypto right now, specifically DeFi, right? So the current state in DeFi is really two questions that I think a lot of people within DeFi ask themselves. Number one is, do I provide liquidity or do I borrow equity? And this is a key question because on one side you have an action that actually supports the development and the growth of the ecosystem, which of course is something that we all want to happen. But that's at the detriment of essentially your capital gains or your capital accumulation, right? Whereas on the other side, borrowing equity is capital efficient, but it's obviously at odds in some cases with the actual growth of the overall ecosystem. So we find ourselves, a lot of DeFi participants find themselves at odds. And, even me personally, I find myself borrowing equity. And I don't so much find myself providing liquidity because as, a humble retailer who's not a whale, it just, in some sense, in most cases, it doesn't really make sense for me to provide liquidity and have myself exposed to impermanence loss when I could be tapping into equity and putting my assets to work in two different places. Another problem that we have within the DeFi ecosystem is obviously asking ourselves, hey, what platform should I use? What ecosystem should I participate in? Should I use Ethereum or should I use Avalanche? Ethereum, for me personally, I feel like Ethereum has some of the best applications. Obviously, the most innovation is happening on top of Ethereum. That's where we see a lot of novel ideas, and almost everything else outside of Ethereum, for the most part, is pretty much a copy and paste of what's being done or already been done on top of Ethereum. But you also have the gas cost of Ethereum. Obviously Ethereum is not affordable for everybody, and for somebody like myself, I may opt to use some cheaper chains. Now, when that happens, I lose out on the great applications and innovation that's being built on top of Ethereum. And, in some cases, you have the ability to borrow equity on Ethereum and then obviously bridge those assets over to Avalanche, but that's not very efficient. You expose yourself to, like what we saw recently with the Ronin bridge, because obviously whenever you're bridging assets in a non-native form, you're simply getting derivatives and you have really counterparty exposure that you really want to avoid within crypto. So it's definitely not the most efficient thing either, and obviously we're missing out on opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity cost when you're providing liquidity, and then you have the opportunity cost of gas fees and deciding what applications that you actually want to use and participate on. So that's where these two new technologies come into place. And these aren't even necessarily protocols, but it's really underlying technology that will be running under the hood on the back end that a lot of DeFi users won't even necessarily see. So today what I want to be talking to you about is actually layer 0 and also a new ERC standard called 4626. Now, what do these two things actually do? So let's just hop into layer 0 because I think this is pretty exciting, and then we'll talk about 4626, and then we'll really tie it all together just to kind of hopefully give you a vision and what I see coming. So obviously this is Left Side Liam. I'm not the most literate advanced person when it comes to this stuff, so we're really just going to be reading from other people's work, articles, and then really just going on from there and discussing from there. By the way, my cat, if you hear any loud background, it's my cat. But this is an article from Rain and Coffee on Twitter. This is a great read. I'll include it in the link below. I would definitely recommend to read. Now, I'm not going to talk about all the technical stuff. I mean, he talks about the technicalities here. And I'm really, like I said, I'm not a technical person. But what I do know is, what I really do care about is the use cases, right? So he highlights some of the use cases here for layer 0. Now, just to so we'll just read through here. So people might confuse layer 0 with a protocol that only allows for cross-chain asset transfer, i.e. bridging assets across chains. However, it is much more than that. Layer 0's general approach to data messaging actually provides a much wider range of potential use cases. In essence, any message or shared state that you require between two separate chains can be unified across layer 0. So the way I see layer 0, just kind of interject here, is quant. Now, I don't know if anybody here is very familiar with quant, but it's something that I've learned about briefly. But essentially what it is, it's very similar to this. It's a messaging application that will essentially exist not as a blockchain, but as an application on top of blockchains, but that will essentially communicate between blockchains, right? Whereas layer 0, they're basically saying, and rather than being on top of the blockchains and communicating messages, that they're going to be under all these different blockchains, and basically these blockchains are going to be sending messages to layer 0. Layer 0 will be forwarding that. And like I said, I'm not going to get into the super technicals here. You can read this article that we're reading at here, but I really want to see, highlight the use cases of layer 0. So state sharing, this is a little more technical, but essentially, let's read it here. If a single application is built on multiple chains, it allows you to sync the state of these applications with each other. So from just that sentence, and we can go into the example. For example, SushiSwap exists on 12 separate chains. To sync state with the main Ethereum instance, code is required for each associated bridge, i.e. wormhole, avalanche. Furthermore, if SushiSwap ever decided to expand to a new ecosystem, more unique code would be required. Layer 0 is a single interface code base for all cross-chain pairs, greatly simplifying the developer and user experience, comparable to the interchain accounts on Cosmos. So essentially, from what I understand, obviously we're left side Liam here, they're just going to have, instead of having 12 separate code bases, they're just going to have potentially one code base that they can kind of share across different chains through the cross-chain messaging. So let's get more to the not as technical stuff. So unified liquidity bridge and the current system bridge compete to attract liquidity to use their service. This has an effect of fragmenting the finality availability of available liquidity between bridges and their individual pair pools. For example, if you wanted to connect a chain with multiple other chains, a massive amount of liquidity required to make each pairwise pool a decent user experience. This is capital inefficient. So this is something I personally experienced, obviously just kind of give an example of this, but sometimes when you're using multi-chain, there isn't exactly, you're not able to actually bridge because there isn't enough liquidity available on the receiving chain that you wish to go to. And obviously that creates headaches. Like you're not able to move your money and move as freely as you would like to, considering that it's the crypto ecosystem. So essentially it'll help with unifying the liquidity. So it allows a single pool of liquidity tied to all chains, but with liquidity on various chains with guaranteed finality of assets transfers on the source chain. This means that when a user makes any asset transfer between two chains, they are guaranteed the asset on the destination chain. Additionally, LP providers receive fees from all transactions to destination chains, irrespective of the source chain it was received from. So the way I imagine that is essentially, instead of having all this, liquidity pairs on each chain, you can kind of just create one big liquidity pool per chain. That can communicate with each other. So again, this is still a little technical, but I think this is where it's going to get a little easier. Cross-chain lending and bridging. So this is something that's been talked about within the crypto and DeFi specifically ecosystem for some time. Is, you know, the opportunity to essentially put something up on top of one application and then go to that same application but on another chain and actually tap into that equity, right? Which is come back to that question of provide liquidity or borrow equity, use Ethereum or Avalanche. So hopefully what Layer 0 allows us to do is, let's say we want to participate in an application on Ethereum, but obviously it's costly to borrow against that and to actually interact with the applications on Ethereum. But there's still a specific application that we want to use to collateralize our assets. Well, Layer 0 is going to allow us to do that. You know, let's say you want to put something on Aave on Ethereum, or let's not even use Aave. Let's any CDP or Abracadabra, for example. We'll just use Abracadabra. I'm a fan of Abracadabra regardless of all the FUD that's happened lately. But, you know, for me personally, you know, I like the fact that I can take yield-bearing Ethereum assets that are generating 4 to 5% paid out in Ethereum and collateralize that, which is what we're going to talk about. This is going to tie into ERC-4626 here in a minute. But allowing us to, you know, put up collateral, because that Ethereum collateral strategy is only available on Ethereum. You know, you can't do that on Avalanche or Phantom or whatever chain that Abracadabra exists on. So Layer 0 would essentially allow us to take opportunity of that Ethereum specific strategy, but not having to deal with the headaches and the high gas fees of Ethereum, right? So, you know, you can collateralize on Ethereum, but then you can switch over to Avalanche and then take that debt and then go ahead and just deploy it into the Avalanche ecosystem without having to pay the fees to take the borrow and then pay the fees to, you know, interact or do the bridge over from Ethereum to Avalanche. So it essentially just takes out steps that you would have to take, right? So instead of borrowing and then bridging, you would literally just switch networks and borrow. And that would say obviously become more capital efficient. It would save people gas that can't exactly afford to operate on Ethereum 100%, but want to have a lot of their core assets in the Ethereum ecosystem to collateralize. So that's the way I see it. You know, for me, as somebody who's not the biggest whale in crypto, you know, I'm not operating on Ethereum 24/7. So I'll take advantage of the opportunities on cheaper chains, even though Avalanche is actually not becoming the cheapest to utilize these days either. But let's just go through an example. You know, it says, let's say you have Ethereum on ETH, you want to participate on Avalanche. You know, just like I said, lend ETH on Ethereum, borrow against your collateral, bridge to Avalanche, swap, interfarm, swap. So so it just reduces steps. So instead of a 9-step process, it goes to a 5 steps. Lend ETH on Ethereum, borrow directly Avalanche, and Avalanche on Avalanche, interfarming, repay the loan, collateral is released on Ethereum. So it provides a simpler and cheaper user experience. So another thing that Layer 0 is going to allow us to do is swaps. Currently, swapping from an asset on chain can be inconvenient for users, especially between assets limited with pairs, right? So, you know, you can't essentially move every single asset from chain to chain. So with Layer 0, cross-chain swaps only require a single transaction. For example, a user will be able to swap from ETH on Ethereum to Sol on Solana without needing any Sol on Solana to execute. So yes, this is literally, like I said, just about making everything more efficient. So in this case, you know, if you want to go to a new chain, I've experienced this. You know, if you want to take your Ethereum from Phantom, it's not the easiest to get Phantom onto Phantom from DEXs, right? Like, there's not a lot of integration with Phantom on sexes, or sorry, I said DEXs, but rather from the centralized exchanges. Like, I don't believe, as far as I know, there's not really a place where you can go buy Phantom and then withdraw it directly to the Phantom ecosystem natively. So that obviously creates a lot of friction, because then people are going to be paying additional Ethereum fees just to bridge that. And this is going to eat up capital, and it really creates a big barrier to entry for a lot of retail users or a lot of everyday users like myself. So this is just going to allow you to go from, you know, say, hey, look, I want to go from Ethereum to Avalanche, and I want to swap my Ethereum directly to Avalanche. Or I want to go from Avalanche to Phantom, and I want to swap my Avalanche directly to Phantom. When I make that swap, rather than swapping before and then bridging over and then swapping again, right? So there's 3 steps that would be required there. Multi-chain, so that kind of covers the swaps, and then multi-chain, so it's going to allow us to move our liquidity cross-chain easier, simpler. So current yield aggregators usually operate with a single ecosystem. Therefore, a key weakness of these aggregators is the inability to take advantage of lucrative farming opportunities on different chains. Considering the exponential expansion of blockchain ecosystems, it is vital that yield aggregators can take advantage of newly arising opportunities without having to be built on top of separate chains. Layer 0 architecture is perfectly placed to take advantage of this current blockchain drawback. Additionally, multi-chain yield aggregators provide beneficial network effects to the ecosystems they connect to, such as reducing market inefficiencies and increasing liquidity. So this is, layer 0 is literally all about reducing the inefficiencies and optimizing what exists, because a lot of what we experience today is very fragmented. So that's kind of the left side review of layer 0. Now I want to jump back into the second topic here and then talk about what it looks like when these two are united. So ERC-4626. Yearn recently did a write-up on this. So you've heard of ERC-20s, 721s, and 1155s. And soon you will know ERC-4626. So this is a tokenized standard vault, and it is final. So here's the TLDR from Yearn. Yield-bearing tokens are a mess. Yield aggregators, vaults, lane markets, and native tokens like XSUSI are often implemented with slight variations. To build a single app, this is very complex. You have to write dozens of complex error-prone adapters that can handle each unique variation. So ERC-4626 standardizes it, and it's going to make things like Abracadabra more widely. What Abracadabra has done, it's going to make that more commonplace, I would assume. And essentially what it's going to do is it's actually going to solve, so layer 0 solves the question, use Ethereum or Avalanche, why not both? And you can kind of use both right now, but it's going to make it much more efficient to use both. Provide liquidity or borrow equity. ERC-4626 is going to standardize this and answer this question like all across the board, whereas right now you only have a couple of protocols that are actually addressing this problem, MyFinance as well as Abracadabra. So hopefully with the implementation of 4626, we're going to see more opportunity to collateralize our liquidity providing positions, right? So instead of asking or, it becomes and provide liquidity and borrow equity. That way we're supporting the growth of the ecosystem, but we're also being capital efficient and taking advantage of the equity that we have locked up into these liquidity pools. And so one thing that I am pretty excited about, let's see. So build on top, it will work for all other contributors working hard. In other words, it's the gold standard for any sort of interest-bearing token, from Yearn vaults to Aave deposits to balancers. Okay, so it's essentially what Abracadabra does, but on a more standardized across the board, which we shall see what happens to Abracadabra's value proposition once this gets more implemented across applications and applications are built. And so one example, obviously Yearn plans to integrate that. I believe, Abracadabra already has integrations with Yearn. They've got the YV, they've got plenty of YV vaults. So that'll be exciting to see if they are able to bring in more. But, beyond just Yearn, we have Pyrex, which is a application being built by Redacted Cartel, which I plan on doing a left side video on that sometime into the future. But essentially, Pyrex plans to utilize the ERC-4626 standard to unlock liquidity for VLCVX holders, right? And that's going to be super exciting. Now, it's not a straight, deposit and get dollars. They're going to be doing something called BFN, or bribe future notes, where you're essentially writing options or selling options on and speculating on the value of bribes. I won't get too deep into this, but this is just one use case that we've already seen pop up now that the ERC-4626 standard has arisen. One thing that I am super excited about, and this kind of goes, all of this ties into a new dawn of DeFi, and specifically speaking of Dawn's, Bancor V3 talks about a new Dawn as well. But I'm super excited to see how Bancor V3 and specifically ERC-4626 integrate together, because that would be super powerful to be able to have a liquidity position where you are not exposed to impermanence loss, and then you can turn around, go to a money market or a marketplace like Abracadabra, a Bancor V3 where you have no exposure to impermanence loss, where you're generating 10, 15, we don't know what the exact numbers are, but then come over to an application like Abracadabra and borrow against that asset for 1 to 2, maybe 3%. And so it really just addresses, both this question of provide liquidity or borrowing equity. So, maybe I could have made this 2 videos. Maybe I will make this into 2 videos, but I'm super excited for both of these underlying technologies. These are not necessarily applications that you can use directly. Layer 0 is something that you build on top of as a developer, and ERC-4626 is something that you'll be utilizing as a developer to build into your project. So these are two technologies that I'm super excited to see projects like Bancor, Abracadabra, Pyrex, and who the heck else knows what's going to come out of this. I know there's some Curve, I know there's some Curve projects working on Curve liquidity pools to tap into equity on that. So, there's going to be a lot of innovation over the next 3, 6, 12, 24 plus months as these technologies get more and more integrated into these applications. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Left Side Liam, and I'll see you next time.